the sales pitch every time, the boot camps and the book and tape sets and, all of that type of upsell. And so for investors, by investors was formed to have a networking event where people can go and network and get educated without that pitch involved. And so all of our chapters throughout Southern California are very similar. We don't have any kind of pitches at any of our events. This one we do more of a panel discussion. I run the FIBI Long Beach as well, which will be more of a presentation or a Q&A or something like that. We have FIBI Orange County. We have FIBI Culver City. Well, where's Jeff? Is Jeff here? Jeff, tell us a little about your chapter, man.
My chapter is FIBI West Side, and my co-chapter leaders are my wife Beth, who's at home with our now 5-year-old tonight, and Zach and Mark. We meet typically the last Wednesday of every month, the day before his other meeting down in Long Beach. We start at like 6:30 with some networking. Some of us eat dinner in the restaurant at the hotel early and you get free parking. And then we have a presentation and then more networking in the bar afterwards. Our topic in 2 weeks should be an interesting, lively debate. It's opportunity zones versus 1031.
Interesting. Awesome.
And we have Bill Exeter from Exeter 1031 Exchange Services. And we have Meyer of CKR Law as our 2 panelists.
Great. It's awesome that, a lot of the different chapters, they'll bring in professional speakers like this that, like our panelists here that have a lot of experience in real estate and in the specific topics that they're dealing with. So you're talking with the people that are in the industry, that understand what's going on, that really have a lot of great knowledge to expel about it. And that's really the entire point of FIBI. He's telling him to cut me off. He's stopping talking right now. It's too much. I didn't talk about politics yet. Don't worry. So no, but at the end of the day, FIBI is here for you guys, and it's really all about the networking. So afterwards we go to North Italia downstairs and do a lot of networking. We provide some appetizers and drinks around you guys, of course. But at the same time, we try to network afterwards and then beforehand, as you guys saw. And it really comes down to that, consistently going and meeting the people over and over again to develop the resources you need to do this business. So that being said, Dave's going to talk a little bit about our sponsors and some of the other things we have going on with our chapters.
Thank you, Matt. I was just killing this slideshow, which I think is still running. Just turn it off. You guys don't need to sit there and look at our faces on the screen as well as in person. That's torture. How you guys doing tonight?
Good.
Good. Well, thanks for coming. As Matt mentioned, really that's the key about coming to a FIBI meeting. For those of you that are new, is clearly we're going to go through some really good education. Now we got a great panel, but it's really the networking. So after this meeting, we get together in North Italia. Once we're going to end as close to 9 o'clock as we can, and then we're going to very politely ask you to get the hell out. Because we need to clean up this space because we've got meetings tomorrow morning. But North Italia is right across the courtyard over here, and that's really where the magic of FIBI happens. Someone was asking me today here in the office about a deal that I'm involved with and whether or not FIBI was a part of that deal. And it's like, well, it is in the sense that every person I'm dealing with, I met through FIBI, right? So that's a big part of what FIBI is all about. So make sure you do some good quality networking. Tonight's panel is a panel that we've actually never done before, in the sense of we've always tackled syndication from the investing side, right? And what it takes to be a successful investor into syndications. Versus tonight, really it's going to be more about becoming a successful syndicator, right? So, being an operator, someone who's looking to raise capital, which, who here has all the money in the world they need to do every single real estate deal they want to do? Right, so Matt's the only guy. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Just trying to push back.
The guy who wouldn't buy anyone a drink has all the money in the world. That's the way it is. Most of us are always looking for investor capital. And that's really, anytime you bring investor capital into a deal and they don't have an active role on a day-to-day, you've created a syndication. So we've got 3 panelists today. Hunter here is an active syndicator in the sense that he's creating opportunities. Really, you're creating syndications to invest in syndications. Ryan is an active operator doing day-to-day operations in mobile home and self-storage facilities. And Anthony down here is a securities attorney that's helping create syndications all day long. So whether or not you're interested in creating a syndication, or if you're interested in investing in syndications and want to learn what are the things you should look for, that's really what tonight's all about. So that's what's on tap for tonight. We do have some sponsors. That's how we manage FIBI. We certainly don't make money with the low price of $20 to attend the meeting. So basically, that's how we kind of keep the club afloat, is through our sponsors. We've got Civic Financing over here, Brian. These guys do private money lending. So if you have any private money for residential or commercial, check with Civic and Brian here. Jeff back here with UDirect IRA. If you don't know that you can use your IRA to invest in real estate, go talk to Jeff. You can. I don't think anyone's here from the Note Assistance Program. But these guys are they're probably in Vegas getting ready for Paper Source. New Western is a company that does wholesaling, and they're really strategic and very technology based, and wholesaling all around the country, but the local chapter here, they're supporters of ours. Spiro Woodward is a local real estate and business firm based here in Redondo Beach. And then Walker Dunlop is a commercial lender. They do more institutional kind of lending. Andrew will probably be here right around 8:59, right before we all go to the bar. So just keep your eyes open for him at that point in time. And then, of course, Matt's company, OCG, and Co-Real Estate Team, my company, we're also part of sponsoring all of this. Upcoming events that we have on, if you all already know Meetup because you're here, but in case you're not, everything is run on meetup.com. Our next panel here is going to be on May the 8th, which will be optimizing your real estate operations. So if you're looking, those of you that run a real estate business, if you're looking for information on how to streamline your operations, you guys are going to cover taxation, you're going to cover technology, you're going to cover
All the facets of running a business.
yeah, so it'll be more about running a business, specifically real estate businesses. So that's what our next topic is about next month. And then on May the 29th, we do our summer networking group. So as Matt mentioned, we have multiple FIBI chapters. Jeff talked about his chapter in Culver City. Matt has a chapter in Cerritos. We've got a chapter in Pasadena. We've got a chapter in Orange County. We've got a chapter in Palm Springs. We've got one in Bakersfield. We just opened up a chapter in Kansas City. So all of the FIBI chapters, on twice a year, we put together a networking meeting, and all we do is network. There's no talking heads with microphones. There's no education. All it is networking. So it's on May the 29th. It's on Meetup, and it's down in Long Beach at the Grand Center in Long Beach. So the last thing I'll say, and then we'll get into some introductions here and start the panel, is this is not intended to be either legal or financial advice. Up here, even though Anthony's an attorney and Matt is a pseudo CPA, everyone here is really just giving you our observations and our based off of our knowledge as investors. If you have specific questions about your situation and you need a referral for someone, please let us know. All the sponsors that we mentioned have stuff on the back, and so if you're looking for referrals, either grab a flyer off the back or find one of us and we can connect you to some good people. With that, last thing I'll say is, this is definitely, we want this to be an open conversation, right? So we've pre-written some questions here, and we're certainly going to kind of go through a bit of a guided tour of this. We've got the evening kind of organized into 3 sections. Okay, so the first section, we're going to kind of go over an overview of just what are syndications. And then the second part, we're going to talk more about due diligence and things that you need to be looking for, if you're doing some research. And the last part of it is we'll talk about operations, and then these guys will get a little bit into the types of investing that they do, the types of syndications that they do. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand. We'd love to get as many questions from the audience as we can. If you've got a very specific question about your situation, Save that when you go over to North Italia. Matt's going to buy you a drink, and then you'll have some free food, and then you can ask these guys whatever questions you want to ask. All right, so with that, let's do some introductions. Hunter, why don't you go first?
All right, everyone. So my name is Hunter Thompson. I'm founder of Cashflow Connections, which, by the way, we're rebranding right now to ASIM Capital. Part of this is because we're most likely going to hit $100 million under management this year, which I'm really excited about. And I think the name really speaks to that. But also, you'll hear from this conversation, I'm really much into looking for asymmetric returns for myself and for our investors. And the syndications are actually a great example of how you can create some asymmetry in terms of the risk that you're putting up versus the returns itself. I'm also the host of the Cashflow Connections Real Estate Podcast, which is it's something I'm really proud of. It's a really dense look at real estate. The podcast space has gotten extremely crowded. There's a lot of saturation in that market. So the way that we're kind of differentiated is the level of depth that we go into in those sort of conversations with attorneys, CPAs, economists. We recently had a consultant to the IMF. Grant Cardone has also been a guest. It's an audio only, but he did give me the finger during the interview, so just kind of, there's a wide variety of guests and content. My specialty is really investing in or identifying great operators to work with in asset classes that I think make a really strong case in terms of recession resistant. So mobile home parks have been a big piece of the portfolio. Self-storage has been a big piece of the portfolio. I'm also very bullish on the assisted living space, given the demographics that are taking place. And I also really like debt right now. With assisted living, it's a very complicated business, so the operating partner is critical. And so we've literally spent years analyzing different operating partners and have yet to identify one that we can really trust. So that'll kind of give you just a brief introduction. I'm a huge fan of the syndicated space. The opportunity that's created for me and for our firm is just incredible because of it's unique in the sense that, again, that asymmetric risk-return profile. So we can talk about all those details soon.
Well, I'm a huge fan of this guy, and I'm on my path to be a huge fan of yours too. I just about to hit halfway there, yeah. So my name's Ryan Smith. I started Elevation Capital Group. My wife and I started it about 17 years ago. We and all of our affiliates own more than $500 million in real estate, primarily mobile home parks and storage in about 30 states. Our whole goal is to buy, generally speaking, existing assets that aren't as good as they should be, and it's our job to make them better. Pretty simple.
Hi everybody, my name is Anthony Horgan. My firm is Reliance Law Group. I'm a corporate transactional attorney, so I help companies raise capital, and I also help companies that acquire businesses or sell their business. So I help people who want to create a syndicated fund and then also sell that business once it becomes a real estate impact. Before we get started, I kind of feel like the meeting can't start until you make fun of Matt for playing golf, and then or vice versa, and call him white.
I still have more material.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You get it all up,
It's the same tired jokes. I'm sure your wife is proud. My name is Matthew Owens. I'm a licensed CPA, not a pseudo CPA. I don't do taxes anymore, so everybody thinks I'm not a CPA because I don't do taxes. But, I flip about 5 houses a month. We've flipped over 700 houses now. We have about 10 million lent out to different flippers in different markets around the country. We do a lot of value-added multifamilies. We invest in short-term rentals. We own a management company and a brokerage out of state. And then I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, or almost 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I just try to find a way to buy more multifamilies and invest in syndications to retire. So, because these guys can do it all for you. It's great.
Clearly, with all that going on, Matt has no time for his golf game, which is, if you've ever seen him swing a club, it is like watching a 2-year-old swing a golf club. It is terrible.
He has a video on my bachelor party hung over playing golf. I'm not going to be very good at that time,
So my company's co-real estate team. We are located here in Keller Williams South Bay. We work with a lot of investors, and we actually have 3 deals right now. One investor is fixing and flipping a property that's in escrow. One's coming out next week, and one we're dropping into escrow next week. So anyone that you know that's fixing and flipping, looking for some real estate help, we help everything from raising capital to structuring the deal and handle the real estate services. I'm also a partner in doing some new construction out in North Hollywood. We're building some smaller subdivisions, and I've actually invested with him, with you, and he did my syndication. So I know all these guys really well, and that's part of my world is just networking and meeting good people. We like to say, actually on our tagline in the questions here, it says that there's no I in real estate. Real estate is the ultimate team sport, and the better investor you will become will be based on the quality of people that you meet. So continue to network here, other places, and find good people. The better people you find, the better investor you'll become. So we're going to get started, and Anthony, I'm going to give you this question first since you're the loan attorney here. Why don't you just give them a general idea of what is a syndication and what makes it different from other kinds of investment structures?
Sure. So I think a syndication in the simplest form is a investment vehicle that allows investors, most of them are passive, to pool their resources and agree upon a financial and operational structure. In its simplest form. So what you usually have is you have a pool of investors who are putting in their capital, an entity that is a manager or sponsor who has primary directional control over business decisions of the entity, and then some agreement, usually an operating agreement or in a liability context, that says, here's what's going to be the split when we make tons of money.
Ryan, I mean, you guys have been doing syndications for years. Why do you like them? Like, what's your, when you have to explain that question, what you do and why you do it through a syndication, how do you answer that question?
Yeah, so and I'll expand or kind of context what you just said into our business. Everything we do evolves around providing value to the investor. And so everything he just said, in the way we execute it, it's many investors into one fund, which then in turn owns many properties. So it's a many to many model, although it can be a many to one model, if that makes sense. So the goal for us is to be able to generate similar returns to the investor as they could maybe get from one asset, but by having many assets across different geographies and asset types, because we do storage and mobile home parks, and we split our capital across. So we're diversified by asset class and geography. Ideally, what we're trying to accomplish is to give a equal or better return with an equal or lower risk. So on a risk-adjusted basis, there's a net benefit to the investor, if that makes sense.
Hunter, as you kind of delve into the syndication space, like what are some of the positives and maybe some of the negative parts of being involved in a syndication? Why are you so gung ho on syndications?
So the first deal that I was invested in was a hard money loan back in 2010 or so. And back then, there was a complete lack of liquidity in the market. You could get really favorable rates on hard money loans if you're willing to loan. And again, looking for that asymmetric outcome, 60% loan to values on hard money, yielding 13, 15%, it's kind of a no-brainer. And I kind of thought, wow, I must be the only one that knows about this. Well, I was kind of right and kind of wrong. It ended up being the case that more and more people found out about that. Now those rates are really hard to achieve. And part of that's because of the barrier to entry, something like single family. With the syndicated model, you're able to invest in high-profile assets, $5, $15, $15 million, and rely on people who are experts, absolute sophisticated operators in their niche, and leverage their time, energy, and access to capital with your investment. And so the key there, though, is that the gross dollars is so significant in most syndications of commercial assets that you're dealing with a really competitive market where the operators stand to gain or lose millions of dollars, and therefore you're dealing with really sophisticated individuals, which is just, I really like to do that when I'm investing alongside of someone. So when I was introduced to the syndicated model, it was just a huge benefit, especially when you consider when you are investing in them, the risk profile is entirely different because you're only putting up your capital. If something goes wrong at a property level, for example, your risk is, you're delineated in terms of the A shares versus the B shares. For example, the LP versus the GP. So if something were to go wrong, if someone were to get injured on the property, as a passive investor, you're not going to really experience that liability that goes along with owning real estate. And so I found that really good.
Which is the LP partners,
Oh
right?
yeah, so the LP partners are the limited partners, because they don't have the oversight into those investments, they're not held liable, and I'm sure the attorney will say it, not always, but generally speaking, they're not held liable to the same degree. And it's also the same in terms of debt. So in many instances, borrowers, the operators need to put up millions of dollars to sign these loans. And so we were able to leverage their expertise without incurring that risk. I just found that really favorable. So I built my portfolio on that and then built a firm around that to invest in those types of vehicles.
Anthony, I mean, what makes a syndication different than just like a joint venture or getting some friends together? Like, where does the line start to cross over to this is now becoming a syndication and security? Can you explain what that means?
So if we talk about what is a security generally, right? It's an investment of money that is for the expectation of profit and a common enterprise based largely off the efforts of others. And that efforts of others things is what's really important. So if you have a couple friends and you want to get together and you guys are going to buy a property and you're going to develop it and just wing it and try it out loud, you're all founders of that company, right? There's nobody there who really has the sole management control of that. But in the syndication context, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm willing to give you my money, but I want you to be fully in charge of this fix and flip enterprise. Or I want you to be in charge of identifying a property that the fund is going to purchase and then operating it, right? And dealing with all the hassle of operating that fund. And then all I really want to have is my return. When you've turned over your capital based on an expectation of profit based on the efforts of somebody else, that's when you get into the land of security, and that's when the securities laws begin. And generally speaking, if you have a security, you have to either register it, which nobody's going to do in the syndicated context. That's what you hear about initial public offerings and S1 registration statements. The process is unbelievably expensive and time consuming. You wouldn't do that for a syndicated deal. But there's specific exemptions from registration. So this is where you hear about things like accredited investors, private placements, and private placement memorandums, right? What there is a regime where if you have a specific set of investors that meet specific criteria and you give them the right information, you can sell them securities without having to register them.
Yeah, that was perfect. That was great. Just drop the mic now, yeah.
I started to feel that ice glaze over, so I just stopped.
It's basically, whenever you're pooling investor money and having those requirements that he just outlined, you have a security, in which case you have to either register and qualify for one of the exemptions, right? So, this comes down to promissory notes as well. This comes down to, a lot of different assets that you could be raising money for. So it's really important to understand when you're raising money where the line is from what a security is versus something that, might not be a security. For example, someone that has management control over that investment and things like that as well. So you want to be careful on that side. That being said, I'd love to ask you guys, so what is a typical, and Ryan, I guess we'll come with you on this one. What would you say a typical syndication structure is from an operation or an operator's perspective when you're doing one of these? How does it work as far as how do the investors get paid? What are the protections there? How is that structure typically coming out to get those investors paid?
Yeah, so happy to do that. And on the heels of what Anthony just said, if you're considering doing a fund or any kind of syndication, make sure you have good advice. I mean, that should be stated because there's a lot of compliance things you have to go through and Form D filings and blue sky filings. And there's a lot of other things you have to do. So make sure you have good advice. And in terms of your question, we're now on our 7th fund, so we've been a part of 7 funds. Every fund that I've done has been different than the preceding one. The goal or the common thread is every one we've done is better than the prior, better to the investor. That's our goal in every one. So they've all varied, but in short, the way our current one is structured, and I only go into this as to answer the question regarding structure, we have 2 classes, because what you will invariably have is you'll have people who want to invest different amounts of money, right? So you'll have somebody who wants to put in, let's say your minimum is 50,000. And you'll have some who may want to put in $1 million. So should they be treated the same? And by the way, there's no right or wrong answer to that question, right? But the way I thought about it, we had our second fund we ever did, we had the average investment was 75,000, and we had a lady put in put in $1 million. And we had one class, one investable class. And so I thought at the end of the fund, I said that was awfully unfair to her to get the same return having put in $1 million as everybody else who put in, let's say an average of 70,000. So the remedy was in our third fund, better. We did 2 classes. So we had a class A and a class B. So if you put in 250,000 or more, then you have a certain preferred return, which I can go into what that is in just a second. So in short, we have, and I'll keep it simple, class A, 250,000 or more. It's a 10% preferred return, cumulative, non-compounding. For class B, it's 50,000 to 250,000. So between that threshold and your class B number, it's 8%. So the first 8% or the first 10% that's produced goes to the investor. One of the things we do, so there are management fees that we get, that kind of helps us keep the lights on. We have historically made our management fees subordinate to the preferred return, meaning we don't get paid until we pay that on a cumulative basis, if that makes sense. So these are just, I'm not giving you the full answer to the question, but the flavor of it. We also have more recently in our current fund, we put a clawback in. So what a lot of times, and all of this, by the way, is the lens to the investor. I know some of you are thinking about, well, what about me as a syndicator? Well, I'm just trying to put your gaze and your focus on the investor because they're the most important question. I'm not the most important in answering this question, if that makes sense. They're the focus. The investor should be the focus. So in this fund, we've put in a clawback, which is to say, in some funds, it's conceivable where a sponsor could get paid in year 2, let's say. And everything after year 2 goes to pot. And they're able to keep that, whatever it is from whatever source it came from. In my opinion, that's not fair to the investor. If I don't finish well, what's the point of any of it? So we put a clawback mechanism. So if I have a windfall in year 2 and don't finish well, I have to actually give that money back to the fund, to the point of 8% or 10%. So in short, the first 8 or 10% goes to the investor. Over 8 or 10 by class, it's a 70-30 split on refinance. It's a 50-50 split on eventual sale. And there's a model that goes into that. I can go into more. Those are short, hard, and fast.
Great. Hunter, do you have anything else to add as far as structuring components when you're dealing with investors on this stuff, as far as the types of structures you've seen out there, and maybe what a bad structure may be as well, and what you don't like to see in some of these documents?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of this will be just really obviously my opinion, and to Ryan's point, it's really important to get great advice, specifically legal advice, because when you enter the world of securities, there can be a criminal component, which by the way is a great advantage from an investor's perspective, in the sense that not only do these sponsors stand to gain or lose millions of dollars, if they act in bad faith, 2 things happen. Number 1, there's that criminal component of them buying and selling securities, but also, if you're investing in, let's say, a $30,000 home and the manager commits fraud, that $30,000 is not going to get you to the finish line of a lawsuit. But if you invest in a fund where you invest $30,000 and everyone else has invested $30,000, cumulatively, you can pursue a sponsor. So I think that's also really favorable when it comes to syndication. When it comes to bad deals, number 1, I personally don't invest in anything that doesn't have a preferred return. So just piggybacking on what Ryan said again, the annual percent that's owed to you on an annual basis prior to the sponsor getting a split. So I would consider that usually not to be market. Something else that I think is kind of counterintuitive, again, just my perspective, I actually don't really like the investors to have a significant amount of voting rights. And the reason for this is that our due diligence is focused on the sponsor. Right? We spend many, many hours on phone calls, on-site visits, extensive due diligence track record review, etc., looking at the sponsor. But the other investors, we don't have a lot of clarity or insight into who they are, and most importantly, how they're going to behave if things go sideways. And if you've read books about market cycles, people tend to act the worst at the worst time. So we can put our faith in a sponsor, and if things start to go sideways, that sponsor should have at least the management control to say, we're not going to sell right now. We're going to hold through this period. We've got great financing in place in order to do that. And so when it comes to voting, I want to see the ability to remove the manager. I think is important. But other than that, I'd like the votes to be limited.
Great, I think it's important to understand, you know, what he's talking about on the preferred returns, where basically the investors get paid first and then there's usually a split afterwards. I see it also in a lot of cases with really, really experienced operators that have so many investors that they don't need to do a preferred return a lot of times. They have performance that they've done over years and people will just continue to invest with them. They don't have to do that. Now that's, you know, a little dangerous in my opinion, because then, you know, where's the incentive for performance? You know, if we're at the top of the market, you want that performance-based incentive to be in there. You don't want to make a 2% return and then have them get paid a bunch of money too when they shouldn't have got paid anything. You know, and you're going to get what you projected in the long run. But a lot of these guys that have, you know, tons of multi-family experience and things like that, for example, they've done thousands of units, they can get away with some stuff like that in different ways. It depends on the relationship base you have as an operator. If you have big giant relationships that's going to get you millions and millions of dollars no matter what, and you know you can go pay them a lower rate, then you might want to change your syndication structure for that structure. It depends on who your investor is, just like what Ryan is saying, going after the actual investor and understanding who your client is in the first place. So, Anthony, you have
Yeah,
some.
one thing I wanted to add as an advantage of the syndication model, it's not really about the structure as much as if you have the relationships with, say, construction company, or you have your own brokerage, or all those sorts of things, syndicators can have relationships with their own fund, right? And so if the syndicator has a great construction company and is using that construction company to provide value to the investors, typically there's going to be a fee for that. So there's going to be a property acquisition, disposition fee, there's going to be a management fee, or just the property management piece if it's an own and operate type model. So there's other ways that if you're a syndicator, you're bringing actual value, you can be compensated through different revenue streams.
Anthony, can you discuss, because you're the attorney here, I'll go to you guys too, because I know you know the answers, but, can you discuss some of the legal paperwork and what some of the main documents involved in an actual syndication that an operator has to understand and, you know, have an attorney put together, and also understand the provisions of to be able to do these?
Sure. So you can always choose not to do any of these, right? You can choose not to do a private placement memorandum, and then we can talk about investors' rescission rights later. But if you're going to do it correctly, typically the pieces that you'll see that I would want to see if I was an investor is a private placement memorandum that describes the business model, describes the risks involved in it, it describes the financial, how the finances are going to work, describes conflicts of interest, describes tax treatment for my investment. And along with that is probably going to be a subscription agreement, which is really just a mechanism for you to say, I'd like to buy in a minimum or $1 million or whatever it is, and then to also provide specific information to the fund so they can make sure that you're qualified to invest. And then the operating agreement is typically the actual operative document that governs the relationship amongst, say, in your example, there's 2 or 3 classes of members, right? The operating agreement is going to say, Class A members are these members that put in this much, Class B, and it's going to provide how exactly it works, who gets voting rights under what scenarios. Now, those things should all be consistent with each other, right? So if you see, you know, a subscription agreement and an operating agreement that don't track what's in the PPM, then you have that's a huge red flag. Something's going wrong there. And then also referenced in any PPM that you prepare is typically sometimes funds will make available other documents. They'll list things that they'll make available to investors if they want them. Title reports if there's a specific property they're looking at, appraisal, whether maybe they did like an entitlement audit, for example, that might be something that an investor wants to see. Most investors don't actually ask for them, but if they're available, then it's just, again, you're sharing more information, protects the company later.
What about the other things that you have in your documents that you think are important? Other things that you want to see when you read a document?
I'll add, I'll say there are things that speaking to future syndicators, okay, not people looking to invest in syndications, okay, so you'll understand why I'm setting that context in a second. But one thing we try not to do is, and this goes back to something Hunter said earlier, we believe that the biggest risk, and that's a question I get all the time by people, is what's the biggest risk? And the biggest risk to me is different than the biggest risk to the investor. And the biggest risk to me, to the investor, is me, the team, who's in charge, how do you make decisions, what's all the eye-rolling, yawn-inducing, integrity, character, moral, all of those things it's so overstated. But that's the biggest risk, is who are you investing in? So what I notice, at least today, is a lot of newer syndicators that are trying to come out of the ground. And what they're doing is they're trying to take the focus off themselves by having an excess of models and pro formas and projections and just a ton of financial data, right? And the reason they're doing that is they're saying, please don't look at me because I don't think I can stand on my own. Now, by the way, I'm not saying they can't. I actually believe everybody in this room, you couldn't stand on your own, just tell the truth. This is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not. It's the truth. And believe it or not, people just want the truth, right? You don't feel the pressure to be something you're not, okay? But the reason I say that is, in my opinion, what they're doing is they're putting a lot of information out there, and let's just be candid. When you have a pro forma, what's the only question when you see a pro forma? The only question is, how wrong is it? Right? Name a pro forma in here that's ever hit to the nose to the day? None. So the only question you're putting out there is, how wrong is the information you're giving your investors by which they're making a decision to make an investment? Well, I want that. So the point in it is, I think it's a huge red flag. Now, from a pure capital raising, what can I do to get the most capital in the door? Yeah, that makes sense. But is that the best long-term decision? Inducing people to make an investment decision based on numbers that will not be achieved. So, in my opinion, it's short-term, it's not long-term focused, and it's causing you to take a lot more risk into the partnership to raise capital, which is actually not serving your investors well. So that's just one thing I wouldn't do are those kind of things.
Yeah, and just, again, about the main risk being the sponsor. So we are frequently approached by new sponsors that have built up a successful track record given the incredible market dynamics we've seen over the last 10 years or so. And so it's very challenging right now to identify great sponsors because you have to go really deep to find out who has been able to accomplish these amazing things because of this once-in-a-lifetime type of run-up, and who has been able to do it because of expertise. And so, having said that, we're constantly looking for new sponsors because that's part of the value add we bring to our investors. So I tell sponsors that are courting us, we're always looking for new investors, new sponsors, in the same way that you're looking for a new best friend, right? Everyone in this room probably have a couple of best friends. They're probably not really actively looking for it. It would be great if you met one randomly, but it would be kind of surprising. So that's kind of how we look at the sponsors. We want to work with best friends, people that we want to be in business with for the next 50 years or so. In terms of legal documents, again, the waterfall should be clearly outlined. The delineation between the sponsor and the investor shares should be clearly outlined. The voting rights should be clearly outlined. The term should be clearly outlined. And the exit plan should be clearly outlined. So those are just a couple.
What happens if, to your point, Ryan, you have projections and you don't raise enough money? Like, what happens in that situation?
Thankfully, I haven't had that problem. So I guess, the way we raise is we start with deal flow. So we never try to raise in advance of deals. It puts the risk on me and on us, because if you don't raise, you may, so what the risk to me is, in many cases, like when we start a fund, for example, usually we seed the fund in terms of we have 3 properties tied up before we even form the fund. And then, that's a big goal, right? You have $5, $10, $20 million worth of property tied up, that if you don't raise the money, you lose your deposit. You get religion fast, okay? So the point in it is, in that case, you may be able to get an extension or some other things, but you risk losing, in that case, my capital. That's not the fund's money. That would be money. So, but I think that's the better way to go. Rather than raise money, have money in the bank, and then you're looking for any deal, and the motivation becomes deploying capital rather than investing it wisely. And I never want to be in a place where I have a lot more money than I do deals, because I just think that's a bad recipe.
On the investor side, it's a great question is, what is, a raise will typically have a minimum and a maximum. And is the minimum tied to at least enough that you can get this project off the ground, or what's plan B, right? part of the diligence process when talking to the syndicate would be, what happens if you don't raise the amount, right? Or what happens also if things don't go exactly as you planned, right? Your model is to acquire a property, dump a bunch of capital into it, and sell it immediately. What happens if halfway through, the market changes and you can't sell? If the answer is, I hadn't thought of it, then that's not a good deal. If the answer is, well, I also have experience in owning and operating property, and here's what we would do, and we looked at comps, and even in that instance, if the sponsor shows that they've thought about this, then that's very reassuring to the investor.
One other thing, I was gonna go back to something I just said. When I said we haven't had the problem, I'll tell you one of the reasons why, and maybe a challenge or something to think about. So one of the things we've done well, and probably blind luck, is we today, we have a system for creating relationships with people. We don't do a lot of advertising and a lot of marketing, but we today have about 15,000 accredited investors in our database that know about us. And for whatever reason, they don't hit stop. Lack of better judgment. But anyway, I'm sorry. But the point in it is we've aggregated a base of investors who are interested in our story and what we're doing, and we tell our story regularly. So we never push people to invest with us. There's never a big appeal. We don't call people, but it comes in, because we have enough people who know about it. So I would say start building out those networks, which this will be helpful in doing, and then make sure you're storing those relationships somewhere and have a means by which you can communicate with them and tell them what you're doing. That's helpful.
I think that's extremely important discussion. A good switching point is to talk about, the investor side of things, and when you are raising capital and finding those investors, what are some of the limitations and requirements that are, when you're doing these things? Because unless you do, a Reg A plus, you're not allowed to advertise and things like that, right? And so,
Well, you can. So there's 506C,
Okay.
right, which allows for public solicitation. And just to go back, Ryan's really downplaying what he's built here. They have a extremely sophisticated investor relations machine, right? They might not be hounding people and hitting off for money. There's a reason why they want to invest in their funds. I get some of your emails, by the way, just so you know. And there are drone videos of new properties that they go out and they've looked at. There's all kinds of information, right? So it's as much of a sales. Now, this is not, you're not supposed to be out soliciting everybody under the sun, right? These are targeted to accredited investors only, right? And they're not allowed to invest just based off of the videos and stuff like that. But when at the size of the fund, everything has to be sort of proportionate, right? If you're gonna do a $5 million fund for an existing property, yeah, you can do a drone video and you can do some stuff that's pretty neat, but you don't need to have an investor relations team. I'd imagine you have like a staff that puts together a lot of the stuff that you guys do. If you don't, then you don't see much.
So every drone video, I fly the drone, I film it, I edit it in Final Cut Pro.
It's completely unacceptable. That's just not fair for everybody else. The videos are amazing. Is there a drone fee in the waterfall?
I think it's important to understand, the limitations here on, if you're doing a exemption that does not allow you to advertise, then what are the ways and requirements that what are the ways you find investors, and what are the typical requirements and documentation type requirements and things like that you have to do before you allow them to invest in the first place?
So I've done Reg D 506B, which is friends and family, no solicitation. You have a limited number, I think it's 35 non-accredited investors. Although, so there's a difference from what we've done. There's Reg D 506B, which I've done 2 years. Those are friends and family. So the benefit of those is you can have non-accredited investors, and then the verification by which you determine somebody to be accredited. It's kind of a self-attestation, generally, more of a check the box accreditation measure. Yes, I'm accredited. Although there's a whole story. I had a lady one time say, "Well, I'm not, but I'll just say that I am." And I said, "I can't accept you." And did not allow her to invest. So don't play around with that either. But Reg D 506C is simple general solicitation. In my opinion, why would you not? So Reg D 506C, you can advertise, right? So why would you pick? And this is just me speaking to myself. Why would I pick a fund where I can't tell people about what I do? You know, and you say, well, 506B you can have non-accredited, 506C you can have accredited, or you have to have accredited. Yeah, but I only want to deal with accredited either way. And I know that sounds incredibly insensitive and it's not fair, but at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, I want the people in the fund to be able to weather the storm, and I don't want somebody saying I can't put food on my table, right?
Can you explain what accredited means?
So the real, Anthony's gonna do it much better than me, but in short, there's a couple of ways you can be determined to be an accredited investor. It's $1 million net worth, excluding your primary residence, excluding your home, or $200,000 a year for the last 2 years of income with the expectation of the same as the present year. And there's other things you can do if you're filed jointly. But anyway, you have to meet those. And so I've had people say, is that like a literal, like $1 million? Like what if that's 999,000? Well, I think the SEC actually said, go find a penny. Like if you're a penny short, go find a penny. There's no wiggle room at all. The only difference on a Reg D 506C is you actually have to verify that they're accredited. It's no longer a check the box for the investor. The onus is on me to take reasonable steps to make the determination as whether or not they're accredited. So every single investor, we have a file and we have a determination not by us, by always a third party, a CPA, attorney, or financial advisor as to whether or not they're accredited. One comment, just as something of value to you that I could give you that may be helpful, there's a technology platform we leverage for our funds. The first 4 funds, we did not use this. We did this all, it was unbelievable. And the last several funds we've used a technology platform that's been incredibly helpful and automates a lot of this. And it's fundamerica.com. So that's a platform that you can leverage. It's got escrow services, all of these things. So that's something that you can use and may benefit you.
Can you guys talk, or Anthony, can you talk briefly about the pre-existing relationship requirements and some of that understanding to give them that?
Sure. So the pre-existing relationship really goes to if you're not doing the accredited only, these 35 other people need to fall under the category of somebody who's sophisticated. So now we're just blurring the lines a little bit, right? So that's the kind of thing where you say, well, you don't meet the literal test of accredited, but tell me about your investment experience. And you say, well, I've been in real estate for 27 years and I've invested in 700 houses, and so you can get more comfortable that way. The solicitation is tied to do you have an existing business relationship with them? It's a fact-sensitive sort of analysis, but generally speaking, it means, look, if they came from your website, that's not it, right? If you had a relationship before that was outside of being a business context, they could probably fit within that. But when you're in that 506B context, you have to look at all those 35 people very closely, because what we didn't talk about here is what's the downside, right? So in the accredited context, when you're talking about the reason why you want to outsource this is because if you're wrong and if you didn't take reasonable steps to verify it and you've blown it for the entire raise, it's not that the one investor, you blew it for them, it's the entire fund. So you can imagine if you had a $200 million fund and somebody came in and you did them a favor and let them come in at $25,000 and they ruin it, right? So that's the big risk that you have there. Now, one thing I want to mention, it hasn't changed yet, but there's proposed rules to change the definition of accredited investor. And what they're thinking about having there is a sort of an educational and experience type thing. Maybe it's an online test where you can get certified by the SEC. And those are proposed rules right now. Those are intended to sort of open up the definition of accredited so more people can fit into this 506C, because like Ryan was saying, like, why wouldn't you want to market this? There's so many people out there.
I'll touch really quickly. So I agree regarding the 506C. There's been some debate over the last couple of years about which one was stronger. And recently, because of the advances in technology and because the investor base is more familiar with investing through online relationships, the 506C has become overwhelmingly favorable. In the sense that provider that Ryan mentioned is one example. They can automate that whole third-party verification process. But we use verifyinvestor.com, and not only does it allow you to market publicly, more to the point, that extra layer of sophistication in terms of the onerous that you're going through is going to further protect you. Also, you don't have to worry about what you say publicly. And there's really a lot of gray area in security. So if you can iron up as many of those areas and close those loops, so to speak, it's going to be really advantageous. I'll also just make a quick note about the Friends and Family Fund. If you're in the process of raising your first syndication, and your business plan is to really go out to friends and family, people who already trust you, and raise $25,000 from them, mostly sophisticated investors that know and trust you. Just a quick story, that's the way that my business was started, and it sounded a little bit something like this. We basically created a structure that only worked if we could raise $500,000. And we had already had success in the business, and we had a track record that we had done with our personal portfolios. And I had a luncheon for 30 people to explain in 45 minutes the benefits of investing in mobile home parks. And the end result of this lunch was me raising $0 from people that trusted me, but they weren't already knowledgeable or interested in the mobile home park business. So it's the exact opposite sometimes. You think these people are going to be so shocked and surprised at this advantageous vehicle, but if they're not already looking for that, it's going to take a pseudo-religious experience to get them to actually fund. So the 506C puts you in a position where you can create an infrastructure to actually attract people that are already along that line of thinking, and those wires you're going to receive can be 10 times larger, and they will continue on an annual basis.
To seize on what he just said and cap that, in terms of, I would say exactly what he said. Rather than finding people that will listen to you and convincing them against their will to, because it feels like that, right? You're like, it's the greatest thing, and they're like yawning and taking a bite of their sandwich or whatever they're like, Yeah, what we learned, we made a switch about 3 years ago. Rather than trying to convince people of the merits of the model, find people that are already convinced and looking for us, and just saying, hey, we exist. And that's, it took me a long time to figure that out. So, surprising.
A lot of times you really don't want to be working with non-accredited investors a lot of times because, like he was saying, those are the guys where when something does take a path, they're the ones that are typically a little bit less educated, not always, some people are really educated, they're just not knowing the requirements. But at the same time, they're the ones that cause the biggest headaches that, the smaller investors ask the most questions, I feel like, too. And because of the lack of education there involved, people that have already been doing this consistently can be really, really valuable, investors. And, kind of switching gears a little bit, Ryan, you had mentioned something that I thought was really valuable was, asking the questions about the downside risk here. And I think it's really important to start discussing that risk and the different things that go into that. For example, when I'm underwriting multifamily properties, you're looking at it saying, great, they have a normal appreciation rate or inflation rate for rents and expenses, however, we're at this current timing in the market where none of that is guaranteed and it may actually go down. And you might have a decrease in rents, and you might have, some lending changes in year 3 that you thought you were going to refinance, and now you have a problem there that, maybe the lending might not be where it's at right now in 3 years from now because we all think that, hey, we're kind of at the top right now, or we don't know how much longer this may last. So you want to look at that risk difference for every deal you're doing, and if the operator has not maybe done the math to say, hey, with no rent increases and no cap rate squeeze at the end for sale, if you had a slightly worse cap rate on sale or something, what is your profits and what is your returns there? Some of those things are really important to determine and understand what happens if there's a major correction right in the middle of your deal. And so understanding that is key and is a major risk. Hunter, when you're looking at these things, can you talk about some of the risks you're trying to mitigate now? Obviously, it's very asset class specific and very operator specific, but from an operator perspective and then maybe on an investment specific perspective, what's your thoughts as far as, the major risks you're seeing right now, or you trying to mitigate a risk for maybe what you're doing right now,
Sure, so I'll start it with the sponsor is so critical that virtually our entire due diligence process is reading between the lines to ensure that the sponsor's claims match up with reality. So from the very first conversation all the way through the legal documents, which are the last list of my part of the diligence process, it's all about reading between the lines to see, is this person worth making a bet on? I mean, I've gone into some of the details in terms of that, but we do things like pull deeds of random properties just to ensure that the entities line up with the fact that they own those entities, for example. We do a tremendous amount of due diligence and on-site visits, et cetera. So the way that we're positioned in the market, a typical investor may invest $50,000 into a fund, and we may invest $5 million into that fund, right? And so cumulatively, we're about 100 times more than a typical investor. So to make it a good deal for the sponsor, I try to be 80 times as annoying as the typical investor. And that way they're getting a good deal. Now, someone like Ryan, who's a great partner of ours, he's dealt with me 80 times more than he would deal with most investors. But we like dealing with each other, he's getting that 20% delta there, so it's worth his time to deal with us. And so that's kind of how we go about mitigating the downside risk. A lot of phone calls, asking the same question twice, calling professional referrals. I think a lot of people are interested in investor referrals. When we give out investor referrals, those are people who have had a great experience with us and friends of mine, right, essentially. I think professional referrals get you an extra level of detail. So the CPA, the attorney, the construction company that these firms work with, they're actually going to give you an extra level of transparency as opposed to a friend of mine that's had a great experience investing and therefore is willing to take a referral call.
Anything else on this question?
Yeah, I think it's a great question to ask is, how many of the fund that you're raising, how much is committed from prior investors, right? Because if you were either non-responsive as a sponsor, if you didn't deliver, if your deal, they felt like they got squeezed and they really didn't make a fair share, they're not gonna come back around, right? So, if there's a large amount that are repeat investors, and then the other thing when we're talking about pro formas is not so much what's the bottom line of this pro forma, it's like, the question should be, how did you come up with all of the interim lines on your P&L, right? So if you have construction costs and you're an operator who is focused in Southern California and you're gonna expand to Arizona, like what's your construction cost based on? Did you just base it off your LA costs? Or did you look at the market, or is this just winging it? I mean, that, again, it's just a sense of feel of this person really thought through this, right? Because the projections won't be right.
Are there any questions out here? We've been talking for an hour and haven't taken. Yeah, go ahead.
We're missing one person on the panel, but I'm sure you can talk about it. So taxes, how the taxes work, how they flow through.
A pseudo CPA.
What?
Since you don't do tax returns.
I don't wanna answer it.
So I'm not a CPA
Put it
at
on your
all, but I'll just tell you at a higher level. So we're an LLC, our fund is an LLC, but it's taxed as a partnership. And by virtue of that, investors get a K-1 on an annual basis with their allocation of income and expenses. And the benefit of that is obviously real estate has good depreciation, at least mobile home parks and storage do. So investors benefit from that depreciation pass through via their K-1. So in our funds, it typically looks like historically anywhere between the first 8 and 10% in a given year is usually offset by depreciation. So you can conceivably receive a 6, 7, 8% return in a year and have a potential for a taxable loss, which then you have some investors call you and say, what, we're losing money? And they're like, no, operating profit, taxable loss. And they go from like petrified, terrified to thrilled all in 2 minutes. It's wonderful.
There's some structures out there specifically too that a lot of operators target specifically for the tax benefits as well, where they'll do a cost segregation analysis, they'll go through and try to open an opportunity fund or something like that and try to specifically target that type of client that's looking for that. They have different what's the one for 1031 exchanges and different structures, the statutory trusts that are set up specifically for people that need 1031 exchanges. Now, my experience is not always the best deal because they're doing it for the tax benefits, and you're talking about usually lower returns than market for those tax benefits. But depends on the operator and the deal and, you know, each company involved, but usually companies that will go through and raise capital for these DSTs.
And I'll offer just this is more our structure of our fund, and we've learned a couple of things. So we have what we consider, it just tells you don't have to be that smart to do this stuff. Let's go. So the first 5 funds we did, we call version 1.0 fund in our model. We have a version 2.0. So in our opinion, and this will be a dynamic conversation. So when you first start a fund, one of the first questions people will ask you is, when am I going to get my money back? Right? Why do you think they're asking you that question? What's the root? Thank you. They're basically saying, I don't trust you. Right? That's actually what they're saying. Now the irony is, as soon as you deploy their capital and you do exactly what you say, you live up to the standard that you create, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year down the way, they'll say, you'll go to them and say, okay, we have an exit potential. And they'll say, no, don't sell. I don't want to sell. I trust you now. Please, I like the income. I like the income. It happened over and over and over again. So in our model, version 2.0, which our 7th fund is under that, the model is buy assets, make them better, grow the income over time, the NOI over time, and then rather than sell them, I mean, how much time, energy, and effort does it go to buy a property? So you go through all of this, you take all this risk just to go sell it. How many of you wish you still had a property you sold in the last 10 years today? Right? So let's repeat that mistake 100-fold, right? So the point is, you know, you have enough experience to know that that's not probably the best long-term model. So we believe in holding real estate long-term and only selling it if the asset or the market no longer makes sense. So the model, and this goes back to the question, I promise this actually ties to something. The model is to buy, improve, and so on any given year, the income is pretty much offset by depreciation without cost seg, which is pretty great. And then there's a point where your income starts rising above that depreciation offset, right? Because most people will ask me, you know, when are we going to get to 12 and 13 and 14, 15 and 20% income, cash on cash, right? And my response is, why would you want that? And then of course they're like, what do you mean why would I want that? So the point is, if the first 10% is offset, if you get to 12 and 13 and 15, you're increasingly tax inefficient, right? So, so why would you want that, right? So the better path, we think, is to, if you have increasing cash flow, that indicates you probably have equity in the property, right? Because value is a multiple of income. If you have income, you probably have value, so you have equity. So we think the better model is to go to a bank, refinance the property, suck some of the equity out, which takes the leverage rate back up to when we first bought it. We're not over leveraging, we're actually just restoring leverage. It's a whole other conversation. But by taking out that refinance, how much tax do you pay on a refi? 0. But now you have to service the refi, which drops your distribution back under the coverage of depreciation. So you pay no tax, so you can go back to paying no tax.
You get the best of both worlds. You get your money back and you still have the property.
I should have just said that. Sorry. No. That was much. No. Yeah, but yes. So there are ways you can, from a tax lens, beyond just the structure and how LLCs, if you really think about the model you're building, try to build the best model with a long-term view. If you want to be long-term view, don't just build the model that's the easiest to raise capital. That's another explanation.
Yeah, question.
I think all you folks mentioned the importance of underwriting the sponsor. What are you typically seeing nowadays on requirements for GP or sponsor co-invest, both at the asset and the others?
I don't know what you do. That's a really good question. Again, this is kind of counterintuitive, but you'll find a pretty significant degree of this. I'll give you 2 kind of counter examples. So one is, you know, that let's say we're thinking about investing in a family office fund where the sponsor is putting up 20 million of 50 million. Number one, I really like doing people that have the ability to write a $20 million check, right? But that sponsor is also a huge portion of the capital stack, meaning that if you have a vote, for example, they are basically the vote. You know, they can get to a majority very easily. So just something to consider. And then on the other end of that spectrum, many times sponsors need to have a significant amount of liquid capital in order to achieve financing. So we could and have done deals where the co-invest is relatively insignificant. I'm not really trying to pull the sheets back or anything like that, but let's say that you have a very large fund and there's a $100,000 co-invest. And there's a $300,000 upfront fee paid to the sponsor. So negative $200,000 co-invest. And honestly, I've invested in everything from the $20 million investment to the $50,000 or $100,000 investment. investment. I know that's not a great answer, but that's just the truth.
Jeff, you had a question?
I was gonna go back to the taxes and say with the new Trump tax rules, LLC income first 20% is tax-free. So do you have model 3.0 that's gonna take that into consideration?
It's the difference between great and greater. It just adds an ER. It's been great. Real estate's the best, in my opinion, it's the best tax investment. It has been, will likely continue to be. Anyway, it'll change, it'll shift and bump around from here, but it's been good.
What are your views on investing in tertiary markets?
For what reason? I'm sorry, not that.
Yeah, I'm just saying like what is your standpoint on investing in tertiary markets? Like, do you think there's more risk there?
Yeah, so it's hard to say because it depends on what market.
Right.
Will we invest in tertiary markets? With mobile home parks, yes.
Okay.
More so than storage. We like to be larger populations, more density, more central, because it's a less moated business as compared to mobile home parks. So it depends on which asset class, which market, where in the market, the asset itself, and how that, So would we consider it just simply? Yeah, we'd look at it. Okay.
Just to add to that, this is something that Ryan really instrumentally, in terms of my perspective on investing, through a lot of conversations that we were kind of talking about earlier. So we're very cash flow focused. So when you start to get in those tertiary markets, you can get that cash flow to a higher degree, which I'm assuming is really the point of the question, right? That's the whole point. But kind of to a point that Ryan made, when you're investing in a lower cap rate environment, if you're able to add a similar amount of value that you could in a tertiary market, the multiple is higher. And from an IRR perspective, it's much more favorable to do so. Now that's a counter example to the tertiary thesis, which I'm a huge proponent of. But when you're looking at building an entire portfolio or building a fund, let's say, it's a good example to consider both of those. So you're weighing the in-place cash flow with that IRR, right? And the cash flow is going to create that predictability of outcome, which is half of the battle, but the other half is that outsized return.
Cool. All right, so we've got about half an hour left here, so let's kind of take the last third of this to talk more about the operational side. And Anthony, first question here is for you. Now, from a passive investor, you've done all the due diligence, right? You wrote the check, and you're now relying on your operator to perform. What are some of the things that an investor should expect from their operator as they go through the life of the deal?
Sure. So what I think would be ideal is you're going to have regular updates of the status of the project and something beyond what's actually in the operating agreement. When we do the operating agreement, we're going to make that very fund-friendly because, like you mentioned before, that squeaky wheel. Sometimes you let the smallest person in and they want to be like involved in management, they want to have this quasi-vote when you're not involved, right? You want them out. And then 2 years later, by the way, they want their money back because they need something else, even though you told them it's going to be a 5-year hold. So what I want to see there is some real regular, like an investor relations, sort of either a person or a team of people who are giving them regular updates on the property. Really neat things is when they're having events at the property, for example. Like we can talk about what you guys have done, where you've invited investors, you've had sort of an open door where they can come in and really see what's happening so that they're really up to date. That's one of the biggest things. Because I think the fear factor is if people just invested their money and they're at their most leery about their investment, the worst thing you can do is close and then just go dark on that piece and say, okay, cool, you got the money, now let's just focus on the project and everything will be fine.
Hunter, what about you? I mean, you've invested in multiple deals. What are some of the best practices you've seen from other syndicators from an investor standpoint? What are some of the things that you're emulating for your fund, for your investors?
So we like to tour properties, the same property after we close, and that's really just to make sure that everything lines up with our expectations in the quarterly reports, et cetera. So, looking at occupancy, for example, in the self-storage business, typically, certainly some sponsors, you'll have the doors that are locked, that you can see that they're not occupied, or you can see that they're occupied based on that. If we're doing a property tour and we see that there's a big discrepancy between our perception of the occupancy and the actual occupancy. That's a big red flag. When we go to a mobile home park and it's in disarray, which counter to, if you're not as familiar with the mobile home park business, the types of assets that you invest in, they're in that 3-star, 4-star park. Disarray is not the state of the types of assets we invest in. They're basically low-income retirement communities. So if you were to see a lot of trash, for example, that would be way outside of something that we would think would be appropriate. So that's kind of more on the investor side, but I'm in that gray area, so that's kind of what I do.
Ron, for you guys, I mean, how much of your staff is dedicated towards acquisition versus the ongoing maintenance of the investments that you're involved with? And then what are the types of things that staff's doing to communicate back to investors or just keeping the operation running smoothly?
Yeah, so this is something I think we've done poorly to a fault, and then I'll quantify that statement. So our whole goal and our focus is giving as much as we can to the investor and not bogging the fund down with expenses. So, you know, I see these funds that are, you know, they have 50 million in capital and they have a team of 8. That's a lot of people, right? And how much revenue do those 8 people generate? Nothing, not a dollar of revenue to one of those 8, right? So that's just bloat. It's you know, so for us, you know, I think as we built our company, I think the first, I think $150 to $200 million that we had raised, we had 2 people, and it was my wife and I dealing with all of it. And that was to the fall. But the reason our motive was we're saving dollars for the investor. It's more to the investor, more to the investor, more to the investor. But it got to the point where it's like we have 4 kids under the age of 6. We have, you know, 1,000 investors. It just got to the point. So about 3 years ago, we made the switch and we brought on 1 new person and then another new person. But right now we have 3 people, and that's our whole goal. And our operating philosophy and property management and on the fund side is we always have 1 more person than we need. And that doesn't mean people are disposable and we don't treat people that way. But at the same time, it always it leads us to find efficiencies in the model in ways maybe we can have somebody do another task rather than just hiring another person. Because you want to keep it, that's a big, I would say, a red flag as a sponsor that has a lot of employees at the fund level, not out in the field. Our people are out in the field. We keep our fund level thin because it doesn't produce any income.
And by the way, when you go to that scope, there's actually technology where you can create an investor portal where everybody has their own login, where you have to keep the portal updated, but everybody else can access as they need, right? And those can get very, very detailed. Some people go as far as putting like receipts and things and they feel like they want to share that much. Other people just put financial reports when they're prepared. But it's not that if you have 1,000 investors, you're going to make 1,000 phone calls and update everybody individually. You can use technology to make it a lot more efficient for you.
Ryan, this question is a little bit more for you, and then Hunter, I would have you take it from more of a passive investor standpoint. But Ryan, so you close a deal, you get all the funding in, everything's done. Now's the hard part, the fun part, right? The operations aspect. Can you talk about what typically you have to do or what you're doing from a performance standpoint on, you know, a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis to continually, you know, implement that operational plan? Like, what are the things you have to do when you're doing this? Do you have managers set up? Are you managing them? How are you analyzing the statements? Like, what are the things you're doing on a monthly basis to really keep tabs on this and make sure you're moving correctly forward? Because that's, you know, you can raise all the money and get find the deal and great, but the hard part is the operation part, right? So.
Right. It's like that internet ad where they had a website, they were thrilled, and then they got 1,000 orders and they popped bottles of champagne. Then they got 100,000 and then 1 million orders, and they're like, wow. You know, right. So in short, you know, we have a really good team. Structurally, though, let me start by saying, so there's a lot of entities involved in a fund or a syndication. So with ours, we have the fund manager, which is an entity. It's the entity that manages the fund, and then we also have a property management company, which is a separate company. We want to bifurcate ownership and operations. We don't want them in the same bucket. You know, because if somebody slips and falls, who's the liable party? The the one responsible for actively managing that property. So we have a third-party property management company with a services agreement between the fund and the property management company, just so you understand structurally. So in terms of the property management company, we have a team. You know, and certainly if it were up to me to do everything all day, you know, people should run. We have a really, really good, not that I'm not, it's a lot. So every property we acquire has an on-site manager, and this goes back to kind of our model. We want to buy properties that support on-site managers. If it's a small tertiary property that can't support, how do you manage it well? You know, and that's a big, if you can't manage it, then why are you buying it? So, so for us, we have on-site managers pretty much on every property. We have VPs, we have 4 VPs that constantly travel the country, 48 weeks to 50 weeks a year each. And so we're constantly, yeah, and by the way, their statement didn't end with a question mark. So they would say Jesus with an exclamation mark, you said Jesus with a question mark. So that's, if it's a question mark, then you should be doing that job. If it's an exclamation mark, then you're perfect, right? So ours are perfect. So the 4 people we have in that function, they love it, that's what they want to do, they're great at it. Any one of them can run any property at any time. They're great. So one of it, this is unique, something unique that we do. We have each VP visit every property constantly. So every month, each VP sees the same. So let's say we have property A. This month, one VP will see it. Next month, the next VP will see it. So we don't regionalize the oversight. We actually unify nationally and then rotate through the system. Because if all of us go to a property today, we all see different things, and we all need those points of view. So we want that. And then Jamie, myself, and Brian, the 3 partners, this is somewhat unique. I think we're always out in the field. We see each property in the system and physically walk it at least once or twice a year ourselves with the managers and make sure everything. So a lot of times people at the top don't generally spend time out in the field, and that's where the magic happens. So that's where we want to be.
Hunter, what about yourself when you're, you know, basically investing in these operators and you know, trying to protect your investors and going through that process of the initial homework? That's great that you do all that, but after the fact, what are you typically doing, you know, on a quarterly or monthly basis to manage them, to make sure that, hey, they're hitting expectations, that you know, they're doing the operations correctly?
Yeah, so again, it does go back to those on-site visits. And I will say that, to be honest, investors and sponsors are very used to, once the deal is funded, they're used to a very passive approach. And so we want to be very respectful of that. So it's all about building a relationship between the lines. So we want to have calls, we want to have those on-site visits, but what we're not trying to do, especially when things are going well, is to really try to push the needle in terms of much. Because we do all of our due diligence up front, and that's what the sponsors expect.
Okay, great.
Keep it short.
And Anthony, from your perspective, what does proper reporting from an operator or sponsor look like, and how do they typically communicate? What's your thoughts on what they should be reporting to people and how it usually comes out?
Sure. So when you talk about what goes into a private placement memorandum, for example, a lot of it is in reference to what would go into a registration statement, right? So what would you be required to do if you were a public company? And so I look at it through that lens. When I started practicing, I worked in a lot of public companies, so that's the kind of lens approach I take. So in the public company context, you have an annual report, you have quarterly reports, and you have 8Ks, like reports about material information, right? Now, I think in that specific instance, public companies have a extreme burden in terms of they have 2 days to file an 8K on something material happening in the business. I don't think that's necessary in this context, but I think that if something material does happen in the business, then it does warrant some communication. And materiality, of course, is always in the context of the overall business. So I'm not talking about every single thing that you think is important, telling everybody. Right? That's going to it's going to be too much. But if there's a significant, something that has a material impact on the overall operation, I think that best practice is to let investors know about it and, you know, what the plan is going forward.
And I would just add one thing, you know, I have a 6-year-old daughter and I've taught her that no is a complete sentence. Okay, so, and it is. So, and you know, I would say that to you as well. So as a potential syndicator yourself, know what you're reporting clarify that, make it abundantly known, set expectations, but then as people try to push you to do special one-off projects and things, like one question I get all the time is, can I get quarterly P&Ls and cash flow statements and balance sheets, right? It's, is it impossible for me to do that? No, it's really easy. We can generate it and send it. What are the risks? Is there a risk you're taking in doing that? Well, I think there's a risk in that you're providing an unaudited cash basis accounting. Then at the end of the year, you have a unaudited tax-based accounting in your K1. And then you also, maybe for us, we actually have an audit report on an annual basis we deliver to our investors. And that's an audited accrual basis accounting. So you have 3 accounting statements, none of which that match. What could go wrong? Right?
And you're dealing with 90% of the people that are financially uneducated.
Right,
So.
but the problem is, it's all on the up and up. But all it takes is a regulator to see somebody turn in 3 separate books that don't add up and match, and now you have an investigation.
And regulators aren't the smartest people in the world either, so.
Yeah, and to be fair, they're doing their best, they're doing, I think they're doing a good job, but I don't wanna get into that position. So the point is, while I'm trying to be a nice guy and meet the request of the investor, at the same time, I'm also trying to protect the investment on the whole. So when I'm saying no, if they don't like my answer or not, that's fine. No's a complete answer. I'm not gonna, because it's my job to protect your capital, whether or not you realize I am, if that makes sense.
And after dealing with enough people with money and taxes and things like that, you realize the giant lack of education there is out there and how people can really completely misunderstand, a statement like that. And, when I was working at CPA firms, they didn't want bookkeepers going and giving out bookkeeping stuff to the clients without it being reviewed by one of the CPAs because it could be construed as a reviewed financial statement or something like that, and you want to be really, really careful there. Speaking of problems and issues and things like that, Hunter, can you talk about any deals that blew up or any problems or maybe something you didn't invest in, there was a major red flag or something like that, or some of the horror stories that you hear out there?
Yeah, so first of all, 2 things happened in my career that I think are really, really fortunate that I really had no say in. Number 1 was just being born at the right time so that I was able to leave college after the real estate collapse. Right, so I started my career in the most favorable time in the history of the United States to start a commercial real estate career. That also was compounded by the fact that I moved to California right after college. And California was absolutely devastated. This room, a lot less people and a lot less laughing and a lot more drinking. And it was not fun.
But I learned a lot during that crash, way more. So.
You got the seminar, but really my point in saying that is that the people that I was able to network at the time had systems in place that allowed them to weather that storm. And so I built my investment thesis based on those key individuals. Now in terms of horror stories, because of what I just kind of outlined, we've been very fortunate in the sense that we haven't dealt with a lot of problems. The one horror story that I really can say is that I made a big bet on an operator that didn't have a lot of experience, and that was me. I invested in single family houses. I'm sure a lot of people here thought that it'd be a great idea at the beginning of their career to buy a $30,000 house in Jackson, Mississippi that rents for $600 a month. $30,000 house, $600 a month, are you kidding me? Well, that didn't work out. And so I bought 3 of them and sold them all for $20,000 each. Yeah. So I took a little haircut on that one.
About 30 of those.
Yeah.
You learn some lessons the hard way. When you have to rehab them 3 times because the tenants move out, the neighborhood knows about it before you do. So fun stuff.
Right. So I learned that lesson, and that's why I was going back to the interest in syndications. Dealing with a property manager that stands to gain or lose $50 a month. Is that guy going to rip you off for $100 every couple of weeks on something that may not be working or something like that? Or do you have to fly there once to check it out and it's ruin your cash flow for the year? So I like to depend on people that are stand to gain $7 million, $5 million, $10 million to execute.
And keep in mind, when you're doing these syndications, you're investing, you're trading that control for diversification, but you're betting on the operator. And what's great about it is you can put small chunks of money across multiple investments and multiple asset classes and multiple operators, so that way you're properly diversified. And if one guy goes to Mexico and takes all your money with you, it's, you know, one small piece of your entire portfolio, so it can really help mitigate that risk substantially. Ryan, what about yourself? What kind of horror stories have you seen or heard about in different ways?
It's gosh, you know,
There's a lot.
yeah, I mean, none of them are, the reason I'm struggling is there's bumps, there's challenges, you learn, and you keep going. I mean, we're really bullish on the business we're building, and so nothing that has prevented us, there's just lessons learned, and a lot of the basis of those lessons I've actually already kind of shared tidbits here and there. But I mean, I would say if you're gonna do a syndication or a fund with partners, make sure you have very clear agreements, you know, and I've been grateful for that. But make sure you have really clear agreements on who's to do what are the remedies, what's the recourse, you know, just make sure that the agreements are clear. Yeah, that would be helpful, and that has been helpful.
Partnerships are not easy, you know, I've been through multiple, and there's great ones and bad ones and different personalities, and knowing who you're doing business with is very, very key, you know, and that's one of the risks of the 10 pages of risks that Anthony puts in a private placement memorandum.
I'm only doing 10.
Well, yeah, okay. So, and realize those risks are all put in there to protect the actual operator that's doing the work. And they're like, this guy could go to Vegas and blow all your money and you can't do anything. If you're accredited, I mean, you probably could, but you know, it's that type of thing in there. Can you talk about some of the scary things you've seen, and Anthony, and also maybe some of the major risks that people should look out for that are in that, you know, in the private placement typically?
Sure, so the worst CPR moment I saw in a deal, it was a public debt deal, and so there was an indenture, and there was a trustee, and the money went to the trustee, and the trustee, we closed, and the trustee then supposed to send this money to the company. And it was 9 figures, and the trustee wired it to the wrong company. And now, they got the money back, trustee is no longer a trustee anymore. But I think can you imagine, like, you go through all that hassle, and finally we close, here's the money, and where's the money, where's the wire, where's the wire? Oh, no.
This is not uncommon, you know, like closing companies do this all the time with real estate transactions. There's wire fraud all over the place. There's rampant.
I would love a video of the receiving party.
Yeah.
It's just that, don't make me realize.
I knew this was gonna eventually happen. I earned this. I'm sorry.
The phone is so staticky. I can't hear you right now. I'm gonna go. I'm calling you. Well, I don't know about the money. Sorry, I'll call you back.
What are some of the other risks that are in your?
So sure, some of the biggest, it's really a question of, things you wanna ask is, what is the exit strategy, right? Like, you're an investor, that's great, you can get your return and all that, but what's the end goal? So, is this a fund, if you hear the term evergreen, is it just gonna keep going on and on? Okay, well then, is there a process that I can get my money out, right? Most funds will not allow you to sell your interest without consent or some mechanism there, right? So in some instances, there's a requirement you hold it for a certain number of years, and then if you want to get out, you got to give them notice, and then you might have to take a haircut because they're kind of doing you a favor, which makes sense from an operator standpoint. But you have to know what you're getting into ahead of time, because there is no, you shouldn't be able to expect that once all the capital is deployed, you can say, by the way, I kind of changed my mind. Is there a cooling off period? I'd like to have a refund.
Ron, how do you, I mean, I know you have people that want to withdraw from the fund. How do you guys handle something like that on your funds? Thank you for that.
No, I'm teasing. No, it's a really good question. So we've dealt with that. I think out of 1,000 investments, roughly, we've had 4 people, 5 people get out, and usually for terrible things, that life events, black swan events. So one of the common questions, and this goes back to something I said a second ago, it's just kind of be brutally honest with people. So one question I get all the time is, can I get out? If I make an investment, can I get out? And I tell everybody, if you think you're going to need to get out, don't invest. I say don't invest in my conversations more than I say anything else, over and over again. Don't invest. I say there may be pathways to liquidity, but they cannot be guaranteed, so make an investment as if you have none, right? So we do have a process for getting people out, and it has been successful, but once again, to my point, it's not guaranteed. I can't guarantee it, you can't guarantee it to your people. So just make sure people are stepping in with that knowledge, that it's a long-term investment and they may not be able to get out. So another thing that we did, so there are the risk factors in our PPM, that's section 8, that's section 8.1, that 27,000. And then at the end, it says this is not a complete enumeration of all the risk factors for this investment, this is just a starter, right? So the point is, one question I get asked a lot is, what question didn't I ask? And almost invariably, people ask the fewest questions about risk, and that's actually the part I talk about the most. So I take them to section 8, I tell them all the risks, how I'm the greatest risk, and so you want to put risks in front of people. When people go to our website, the first thing that pops up, you have a modal window that you have to agree to, and that's a statement of all the risks. So the point is, you want to put people, you want to provide friction in the process to their benefit. Yeah, and for what it's worth, you say that as an you're like, man, I'm doing all of this to try to raise capital, and now you want me to try to just tell everybody to go somewhere else. And interestingly enough, I can't tell you that I've lost anybody for it. And if I did, I wouldn't care. I would still do it because it's the right way of doing it. But I honestly don't think it's that big of a hindrance, but it's the right way. There's a right way and a wrong way to me to raise capital.
Educating your investors is the right way.
Correct.
It's effectively an insurance policy, right? Because something does go wrong later, and they say, well, I'd like my money back. You can say, well, I told you in 4 different risk factors and a conflict of interest section and a description of the business that this could have happened. So you made an investment decision, there was no guarantee. There was a complete answer. Was it complete?
And every one of those conversations, I would also say, so you have these conversations with investors. We have a system, and every conversation I have it notated. So I can pull up every investor and have every conversation I've ever had with them notated. So if I told you not to invest, I actually document. Ask me this question, I said don't invest. And so I have documentation of all those conversations. So I don't, one person may say don't do that because it's documentation, but I think it shows a common theme of the way we treat these questions.
For those that haven't reviewed a PPM, the risk disclosures reads a lot like the same disclosure from the South Park disclosure. It's like the characters should not be trusted and fake voices. I just want to go back about the horror stories real quick. Something came to mind that we made an investment in a retail shopping center that's doing quite well. We're going to outperform, basically. We're confident in that. I don't want to set expectations in terms of future deals. But during the same quarter, the elevator broke and there was a massive storm in Houston. And so we had reserves to issue the same cash flow distribution, but we decided to hold off for 2 quarters as the elevator was repaired. The takeaway there, in my opinion, was that when investors go into a syndication, they're basically looking for those 2 things that I mentioned earlier, their predictability of outcome and that outsized return. And so we basically made the choice that from this point forward, we're most likely not going to do any more single asset investments. Now we really strongly prefer the fund model. The economies of scale, you get that predictability of outcome. That one example, if that had happened, which is a unique situation, the elevator breaks, which was very expensive, and that massive storm takes place, most investors would not have known if we just included 2 more properties in that same vehicle. And I really like that the amount of diversification you get, not only in terms of multiple entities, multiple geographic locations, multiple on-site managers, multiple risk profiles. So again, going back to building a portfolio, if you buy an asset that is 99% occupied in a fairly stabilized market, you can then counterbalance that by buying a 60% occupied property in a tertiary market. Done on an individual basis, maybe neither would be appropriate, but in a fund, they start to balance each other out, and you really can get that predictability of outcome through cash flow and that outsized return through the IRR generation.
Cool, so we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's end on what you are currently doing, some of the things that are going well. So Hunter, what are some of the asset classes that you're focused on right now as a syndicator and as an operator?
So been bullish on mobile home park and self-storage sectors for a really long time. I mentioned Ryan being really instrumental in that. We've done many deals together and we'll continue to work together for many years. Like I mentioned, assisted living. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I still always do hard money loans, but it's really just a matter to keep investor capital invested without taking exposure on the equity side, without being exposed to price corrections, basically. Just paddle.
Why mobile home parks and self-storage?
So I started a software company in high school, came out of college, you didn't guess that, right? You didn't do it.
That's impressive.
Oh, thanks, I was quite the nerd. That was a compliment, apparently not anymore. But no, I started a software company in high school, built for real estate investors, built a software application for my dad, built it out, made a good amount of money. Came out of college, started using that tool that I built, the cash that I generated from the tool, and the knowledge that real estate was a great place to play. My wife and I built a portfolio of about 20 some odd homes, single family. That's what our parents did respectively. And we realized pretty quickly it wasn't scalable. After building a little portfolio, it wasn't that scalable. And so we wanted something more scalable, better. My grandfather's a prolific investor, and he taught me about a moat. He raised me to know about a moat, among other things. So for me, I started looking for another asset class that I could invest into and considered apartments, storage, billboards, resident, the gamut. And basically, I built a thesis and a model for each asset class. And my thought was, at the end of the day, I'm going to throw them on the table, let them duke it out, and I'll pursue the ones that win. The two that I liked the most were mobile home parks and storage. Interestingly enough, today, 17 years later, those are the two that we do. The compelling feature about mobile home parks right off the bat was I thought I saw a moat hiding in plain sight. And this is what I mean by that. So if I were to ask everybody in the room, Pepsi or Coke, okay, and you have to pick one just to make it fun. Yeah, the interesting thing is it'll be close to 50-50, okay? And Pepsi and Coke have spent nearly $1 trillion in marketing in their histories to get you to answer that question appropriately, right? So after $1 trillion, they're 50% effective, right? So my thought was, in the mobile home park space, I've never spent a penny, and I have 100% unanimous response. And the response is, mobile home park next to your home, yes or no? 100% no. Hell no, right? So the point is, I haven't spent $1, and I have 100% agreement. They've spent $1 trillion and only at 50% effective. I'm like, that's a hell of a moat, right? That's a moat. It's a free moat hiding in plain sight. So the net result of it is I came to the conclusion that mobile home parks are needed everywhere. They're not allowed anywhere because they're needed everywhere, right? And I thought, okay, so there's a moat, and then I thought, okay, well, how durable is that moat? How pervasive, persistent, consistent will that moat be? And I thought, this is not going to change anytime soon. And all these years later, it has not changed. So mobile home parks, in short, the reason we started in that space is that you can't build one if you tried. Demand every year goes up, supply is constrained by the stigma. And to evidence it, lastly, I would say, in a humorous way, if you think that's the most ridiculous, crazy thing you've ever heard, all I would ask you to do is leave this room and tell everybody. Because you're doing that helps protect our capital for years to come, and for that I say thank you.
Right, what do you see these days? What are you working on?
I wouldn't call them asset classes, but two things that really jump out in real estate are opportunity zone funds. There's been enough comfort there where people are moving forward with creating funds that we've been able to create a few of those for clients. And then the other big space, I think in the last month and a half, we probably had 6 new transactions come through that are in the cannabis space. A lot of those businesses, whether in cultivation, retail, whatever vertical they're in has some real estate component to it. So those are kind of, our business is largely driven by our clients' businesses. And that's where a lot of capital is coming right now.
Very good. All right, well, it is 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and cut it off. Let me get a big round of applause right now. So if you enjoyed it, again, our next meeting is on May the 8th, and it's going to be all about the operational side. I know we kind of touched on it here a little bit. We're going to really dive into the operational side of real estate. We have a couple minutes here, so we'll get some cards, and then when you're all done, if you kind of behind this wall right here, there's a hallway, there's a door, and then if you go to the back door, there's another door in the stairwell. On this corner over here of the Points, the restaurant's called North Italia. We have the whole patio reserved, so come on over, have some food. Matt's buying drinks, and we'll see you guys. guys soon. Thanks so much.